In the past, I've made a tutorial about how to easily set up a control rig for your character in Blender with Rigify. And a lot of people say, well, Rigify makes it a little too easy and it's actually not very flexible, and that is very true. So today, I want to take a look at how to set up a more specific rig to your specific needs. That is going to take a little bit more work and is a little bit more involved than just adding the Rigify rig and calling it a day. But it's also, as a result, going to give you more flexibility. So what we're going to do here is I have my character. I've been rigging this, and that's why I was thinking about, hey, maybe I should make a video about this. I have my character here that has a IK control for the hand. As you can see, it's a little busy on screen. Excuse me for that. It has the pull target, as you would expect an IK to have. Then it has some tweak bones that can like fine-tune your poses a little bit as you want to pose your character. They don't have rotation, they only have position in my case. Rotation for the hand is done with the IK controller as well. And then we have a separate hierarchy of bones to control the FK with, and we have a switch here in the bottom right corner to go from IK to FK and back. It does share the same tweaking bones. You can of course set up your own rig in whatever way you need it to be. If you needed to have separate tweaking bones for FK and IK, you can do that. You'll see in a moment. So we're going to kind of just reproduce what I have set up here on the right side, but on the left side for the other arm for my character. So you can see me going through everything in practice and explaining to you how to set everything up. So first and foremost, I'm going to select everything and clear transform for all. So you can just F3 and find clear transform to make sure that everything is back in its original T-pose position. And then one important thing is we're going to go into the data for the skeleton, and we have a bunch of bone groups. You're going to want to have this, otherwise this is going to be a mess. If I turn everything on at the same time, a lot of bones suddenly become hard to select and all that kind of stuff, because we're going to be working with quite a lot of bones. The main idea of what we're going to do here is that we're not actually going to be influencing the deform bones, which are the actual bones that the mesh is parented to, directly. All that these are going to do is these are going to be stretching, or maybe in your case, copying the location or rotation or transform of all bones. In my example here, we're going to be using stretching to given points that get generated by either the FK or IK rig. So if I go into here, you can see we have these IK bones. This does all the IK stuff. The character isn't parented to these. This is just to drive the deform bones to know where they should be moving to, because that way we can easily set it up to go either to one position or another position and add in the tweaking, and it makes your rig just a lot more malleable to not actually put your constraints directly onto your deform bones. So with all of that in mind, we're going to get started with the IK because that's the most complex, and then we'll add the FK at the end. So let's turn on our deform bone group. And I'll show you how to set up everything in the proper bone groups in a moment as we start making new bones. Go over into edit mode, and we'll copy over the bones that we want to make an IK rig for. So in this case, that's just the upper two arms bones here. We don't need to copy over the hand bone because the hand bone is outside of the actual IK. So we just Shift D to duplicate. We make sure that we duplicate it by moving them, and I right click so they snap back to their original position. Now we have those duplicated bones selected, and we can see with this little icon over here, they are part of the deform bones group. We're going to remove them from that group, and we're going to add them to the IK rig bones instead. So we assign them there. Now, if we turn off the deform bones, we have them still in the IK rig bones, as you can see, like that. Now, coming off this second bone, we're going to be selecting both of its endpoints, and we're going to be extruding two bones out of that as well. Then selecting them one at a time and clearing their parents, because we're going to be setting up their parenting within a bone constraint in a moment. These are going to be our tweaking bones. So we do the same thing here. We go to tweaking bones, we assign, and we make sure to remove them from IK bones. Let's turn on tweaking bones real quick. You can see I personally set up my tweaking bones to be red. I will also give them colors in a moment, obviously. So those are the tweak bones. Now we also need to extrude out one bone for the IK controller, which we also want to clear parent on. And then we also extrude out one more bone that we also clear parent on, and that is going to move just a little bit back. These two are going to be for the IK. Ideally, obviously, you give these names, because if you just go through, this one is now called arm R001.003. So this would ideally be something like arm.r.ik.pull or something like that. You can use your own naming conventions on however you prefer them to do. I'm not going to waste your time naming everything right now, because that's going to take up a lot of time in this video, and I don't want to do that. Once I'm done with this, I'm going to go back through and name everything so that everything is clear as to what it is, and you should do that as well. With all these bones now, we're going to go back into pose mode. And in pose mode, we'll select the big arm bone, so the one that's connected to the hand and the elbow, and then add a bone constraint to it. Do make sure that you're not in the normal constraints, but in the bone constraints, which are only available if you're in pose mode. So adding that, we are going to add a inverse kinematics to it. We set our target to be the player character's skeleton. And then we get to choose the bone, which of course is going to be this bone that we created right here. We set the chain length, in this case to 2, because I wanted to control both this bone and the bone above it. If your arm is like a tentacle or whatever, and it has like 18 bones in it, obviously you set this chain length to something longer. Then the pull target is going to be the bone that we pulled back here a little bit. And that's going to be where the elbow points. So you do need to actually also select the bone. In my case, it starts pointing away from it, which is obviously not what we want. When I move the bone for the control, the elbow is now pointing away. So we'll set this to a pull angle of 180. Well, actually, it seems like we needed to set it to a pull angle of 90 or minus 90. That seems about right. This is entirely dependent on the rotation of your bone when you made the bones. If you made like any weird rotations with them, this might even be a value that's a little offset from 90 degrees or minus 90 degrees or 180 degrees. But usually it's one of those three. In my case, I seem to have messed up a little bit because it's not quite pointing at it, but it's good enough. So we effectively have our IK setup now, right? We can control this IK with this bone, and that's pretty much all that we want to be able to do. So I'm going to clear transform on all to snap everything back to its original position. These two tweaking bones are going to be following these two bones. So let's select one of the tweaking bones, add a bone constraint, and we're going to be a child of. We're going to select the target and then select the bone. Now when we move this bone, which we'll do through IK, you see that that tweaking bone will follow it along. So those tweaking bones will now follow along with whatever the IK says, and then the deform bones are going to move to reach toward those tweaking bones. So the IK doesn't actually directly influence the deform bones at all. They just both have something to do with the tweaking bones. Now, if you want to set up your child of constraint and you have like your stuff offset, so we are going to like make this happen like this. Now it will have like a default baked in offset, which is maybe not what you want. So you can go into your child off and you can set inverse, which makes it snap back to the starting position. So if we clear transform, and we then set inverse, it will snap back to its starting position, just in case you accidentally set up this child of constraint while your skeleton wasn't in its default T-pose. Now, for the IK, I want to do one more thing, because by default, IK doesn't allow you to stretch. What we're going to do is we're going to come into both of these bones, selecting them both. In the bone properties, I'll set the IK stretch under inverse kinematics, selected while holding Alt, and I'm going to set it to about 0.1. What this is going to do is it's more or less just going to allow stretching while not messing too much with making it smaller when you move it into the body. But it will make it bigger when it moves out of the body. Now, these bones themselves are grown quite large, which is not good if this was the deform bones. But luckily, they aren't the deform bones, and the deform bones themselves are going to deal with this a lot better. So, speaking of that, let's actually go and set up the deform bones. We'll go back in here. We'll set the IK rig bones to being invisible, because we're not going to be using those for a little bit. And then we'll set the deform bones to being visible again. And actually, let's make sure that everything is in its default position as well, just to be sure. So now, these are the deform bones, right? If we turn them off, we can see this is the deform bone. These are going to be the bones that actually drive our character. The weight painting is still bad, don't mind that. So if we go into the bone constraints for this, we can make a stretch to constraint, and we can tell it to stretch to a specific bone. So now this bone is going to be trying to stretch to wherever this bone exists. And we're going to be doing the same thing here. So we're going to stretch to, and then we're going to stretch to the next bone in this chain. And the wonderful thing about the stretch to constraint is that it has a default setup for maintaining volume. So where everything just became larger when we stretched with IK before, this is just going to stretch to that position and trying to maintain its volume, meaning that as it gets longer, it will also get thinner, which is a general concept in animation with stretching and squashing, that you should always at least roughly maintain the total volume of your objects. So now let's turn the IK bones back on, actually, because I'm going to show you. If I move this, you can see that, let's hide these two bones real quick, that everything becomes thinner as I stretch it out, and that is exactly what you want it to do. This bit here, again, bad weight painting. You'll also notice that the hand stretches out, and I actually don't want the hand to stretch out in this case. So going into the deform bones again, let's turn off the IK rig bones. I'm going to select the hand bone, and in its bone properties, I want to say inherit scale set to none, so that it doesn't scale up with its parents. I want the hand to stay the same, specifically because it also has a child bone of its own to have a weapon inside, and I don't want the weapons to scale weirdly, obviously. There's one last thing that we need to do, and we need this hand bone to also copy the rotation of our IK controlling bone, which is fairly easy. So this one I'm going to do directly on the deform bone, and just checking which one is the deform bone. It's this one. Turn on IK bones again, add a bone constraint. We're going to add in a copy rotation. You could add like in between like a proxy bone here as well if you want to, in case you need this to do something weird. I don't think in my case that's going to be too relevant. So I'm just going to directly copy its rotation. And now we'll copy the rotation of that control bone. So if we turn off the deform bones again, we can now also change the rotation of the hand with our IK controller. If you want these controllers, by the way, to look like the controls that I have here, that is simply a matter of going into the bone, scrolling down a little bit. For these control bones also, we're going to turn off deform in a moment, but we'll do that at the very end. You can set it to render as a custom object, and I've just made a couple of curve objects here. And you can just select them like this. It's probably easier to select them actually in the hierarchy up here. And then it'll start rendering as that object. So that makes the entire rig just feel a little bit more like obvious as to what does was. These cubes are IK controllers. These spheres are like IK balls. These things are rotational. And then the tweak bones I also just use the same circles as. Now, I personally am using left side colored as blue, right side colored as green. So I'm going to select both of these as well. Hold Alt to edit both of them at once. Select the color, and we're going to set this to blue so that I have my controls colored properly. Because obviously those are supposed to be there when I enable the control bones. And then for the tweak bones, again, I would just usually make them red and with these little, and then select the circle for how they render. So we just click on these, scroll down, custom objects, to the circle. Again, it's kind of difficult to click on curves, so I just choose them from the scene hierarchy here. And then these ones I want to like scale down a little bit. So I want to set this to like 0.5 times the size or something like that, so that they're a little bit smaller, and then I set them to red. If they're weirdly rotated, you can also either like translate them along their axes, or you can like rotate these. That's just purely a visual thing, but it'll be nice to like have them actually look good. Now, with all of that done, we can finally move on to the FK stuff, which is going to be fairly straightforward. Let's turn off everything else that we have going on here and just turn on the deform bones again. And we'll go back into edit mode, where we will just copy over these 3 bones, Shift D to duplicate, make sure that they are duplicated, right click to cancel any translation, and then immediately add that to the FK rig bones group, and then we'll remove them from the deform bones group. So now when we turn off deform bones, they are no longer there. FK bones, they will be there. And this doesn't really need any rigging setup, because FK is just kind of the way that these work by default. If we go into pose mode, we just remove the stretch 2 constraints that exist on these, because we just copied over existing bones that we set those up on. But FK is just the way that this works by default, right? So yeah, this just works without anything needed to be added to it. So the only thing that we need to do now is we need to make a toggle that lets us move our tweaking bones from our IK driver bones to our FK driver bones. So let's create that. Turn on the tweaking bones. We have this. In bone constraints, we can make it a child of the IK bone that we've been doing. And also let's make sure that when we do this, everything is set to default position. We can just add a second child of. So we do a child of this bone instead. And then for this one, add a second child of as well. So that'll be a child of the upper arm bone. But now we need to do something where these two are going to be inverse to each other, right? So when this one is 0, this needs to be 1. And when this is 1, this needs to be 0. Because you can either have it follow the IK bones or the FK bones. So the way I want to do that is coming up into the orange objects tab here. And at the very bottom, we can add custom properties. So we'll just add a custom property, set the settings for it. It should be a float, and we can give it a name. So in this case, I'm going to call this left arm IK. Default value, I'm going to set to 1, minimum value 0, maximum value 1. All that makes sense. So we press OK. When we've done that, you can right click on your newly created property and you can get the full data path or just get the data path. That should both work fairly well. Just copy data path, and going back into the bone constraints on these tweaking bones, we now go to the first one of our child of constraints, and we right click this influence and we add a driver. It's going to start with a normal default variable, and if it disappears, you can right click on it again and add its driver. Or you can actually open drivers editor, which is a little easier because it gives you a screen that doesn't disappear. You can click on this driver, and now we can see everything going on fairly well. By default, it adds this default variable for you. We're going to change that to being a single property instead, for which we need to select an object. So I'm going to select my player character in this case. And then we need to give the data path to the property that we're going to be using for this driver. This is just a little bit of code that sets a value. We just copy that over, so we can just left arm IK, and it will now just use that value, which is exactly what we want, because we want this value to effectively, when it's 1, we should be using IK. When it's 0, we should not be using the IK. So we can copy this driver over. If you right click on it, copy driver, go over to our other tweaking bone and just paste the driver in. Now, if you did that, you do need to go back in and recopy over the data path. So maybe wait with doing that, but you can just recopy it. It's not that big a deal. We're going to set up the other driver. So right click on the other child of constraint and add a new driver as well. Set that up to be a single property. Take that property from player character, from left arm IK. And this time we're going to change the expression. So make sure that the type is a scripted expression. So this time what we're going to do is we're going to do 1 minus the value of var. And var is just a default name for the variable that it adds. So this is going to take that property that we did and kind of just invert it. As you'll see, this is now a value of 1 and this is a value of 0. If we go in and we set this to a value of 0.859, this value now becomes 0.141. We did kind of mess up this driver, however, so let's edit that real quick. Because this is now just doing var plus 1. What we wanted to do is we just wanted to be the value of var. So the expression for the top one should just be var and nothing else. And now you see that it actually does that properly. And we do need to also update that in the other one that I did. So my mistake there. It's not var plus 1, it's just var. And then we can add a new driver to this as well, which will be 1 minus var. Again, change this to a single property. You know the drill by now. Player character, left arm IK, and we have our drivers. Meaning that I can go into my object properties and I can change the rotation of this thing. And then if I set the left arm IK all the way to 0, and then we also do need to make sure, I make this mistake all the time. After you've clicked on it once, you do need to click on it again with the specific bone that we're going to be targeting here. So don't forget to do that, otherwise it's not going to work. But once we have all of that in place, we can move this arm around. And we can do that because our left arm IK here is set to 0. But if I set it back to 1, it will no longer be following the FK. Because instead it will be following the IK. So let's actually put both the IK and FK control bones to be on. So you can see now it's following this. But if I set this back to being 1, it interpolates smoothly between IK and FK. The only thing that we might still need to do is make the hand bone also interpolate between the rotations of both of these. So let's turn on the deform bones again real quick. And this deform bone, we're going to do the same thing that we did in the other ones, just with the copy rotation constraint instead. So we do a copy rotation, and we can kind of just select any of the tweaking bones and just copy the driver from those at this point. So we can copy driver, go to this bone over here, and paste the driver, and then copy this driver again, and then to make sure that we select everything properly, turn everything else off, and paste that driver in again. And now everything should effectively work as you would expect it to. So we can turn off the deform bones because we don't want to edit those directly. Matter of fact, we shouldn't be able to even edit those directly. And set up our control bones, our tweaking bones, and maybe even our FK bones. Go into our data properties tab and animate this however we would like. So we effectively have the same thing. We have our IK bones with the little like extra offset tweakers that we can use to like really tweak the poses that we want to get. And the wonderful thing about this compared to something the way that, for instance, Rigify does things, because Rigify lets you snap FK bones to the IK bones, right? Which is a good way of doing it. That means that you can't easily change from FK to IK mid-animation without there being like a little jump cut associated with it oftentimes. With this, you can just interpolate between the two types of control rig. So if you go from pose A to pose B, and one should be FK and the other should be IK, if you line up the FK bones to be kind of just good enough to the IK bones in both of those poses, and then you just interpolate this value, you will smoothly transition from one to the other. Now again, do keep in mind that whatever you are rigging might require specific other things that you might want to set up specific other ways, but the general overview of having deform bones that aren't directly impacted with constraints, but rather you set up different sets of bones with their own constraints, so that you can have multiple different sets of those, and then interpolate your deform bones to any of those. That is kind of what I'm getting at here. That will allow your rig to be a lot more malleable and a lot more adjustable down the line as well. And it really gets all of the annoying stuff out of your way while animating and gives you all the power to do exactly what you need to make the animations that you want. You can even set up specific parts of a rig that you specifically need for a specific animation and then just kind of ignore it after that with everything else that you're doing. Because at this point, we've kind of made this rig in a somewhat modular way, you could almost say. Oh, and I almost forgot, because we added a lot of bones that might be marked as deform bones right now, you want to just enable all of your bone collection categories and then say deform bones don't show. So now it will only be showing you things that you're going to be using as controller bones. So just select everything and then go into your bone properties, scroll down to Deform, holding down Alt and making sure that it is unticked. So now everything that you had selected will be marked as non-deform, which is quite relevant if you're going to be doing this before parenting to your character mesh, because then you don't want these to be taken into account for like automatic weights and that kind of stuff. But more importantly, when you export this into your game engine or whatever other software that you might be doing this for, you want to export this as only deform bones. So it'll leave all of these extra bones behind, because all your animations will get baked to the deform bones, specifically for things like game engines. That's of course very important, because you don't want to have a lot of bones that aren't doing anything except taking up computing space. And a very big thank you to all my Patreons. You can see them on screen right now. If you want to help support the channel or get any of the project files in any of my tutorials, there's a link down below to the Patreon page to support me, or alternatively as a YouTube member. And of course, an extra massive thank you to my Cave Digger tier supporters, Sergey Thomas and Mauricio Farias. And my Cave Student tier supporters, Oiku and Earl Monsville Urno.